The panorama that I want to build and finish in Photoshop today is a late winter scene in Arctic Norway, near where the Skoelva river runs into a very pretty fjord. Across the way is the Island of Senja. The winter sun hangs low in the sky and casts a lovely soft backlight into the reflections of the water. This is a superb coastal scene, and the boat shed there on the left side just adds that extra dimension to this sweeping viewpoint. So we have 7 images that we have in a folder, and we take those 7 images into Camera Raw in Adobe Photoshop. Here they pop up onto the right hand side. We select all, and then we go back in and merge to panorama. Today I want to use the cylindrical option. Mostly I use spherical, but sometimes where there's extra foreground and sky, I use cylindrical. So what I do is I check the boundary warp to see whether I need 100% or whether I need to just back it down a little bit. And sometimes around halfway is all you need. That looks pretty good to me, so we'll merge that. And we save it as a coastal scene in our folder. And as it's popped back in as a finished image, while we're still in Camera Raw, the first things we want to do is change our shadows, our highlights and our whites. And as is often the case, we need to work the highlights and the whites quite a bit to just get that transition between dark and light spot on. The contrast is pretty good, so we don't need to change that. And of course, I want to pop the vibrance up a fair bit. And after doing that, it's a question of checking the temperature and the tint. Temperature comes right up towards the yellow and the warmer tones, and the tint is done as well. And then of course we'll add a little gradient tool, and we need to change the temperature and the tint of that and the exposure. This is all according to personal taste, but it's something I often do when I'm building a panorama. And in this case, I want to check out the warmer tones, so I boost the saturation of the reds, oranges and yellows, and then I will pop into the hues and see if the yellows and oranges need tuning up as well. I'm pretty happy with that, so we'll open the image in Photoshop now, and this is where the real fun begins, because there's quite a bit of work to do to this, and most of those will be in the toning. So we'll be doing quite a lot of brush work today in this photograph. First thing though, let's check our levels. I didn't do it in Camera Raw because it's a little bit up and down, and this way I feel is better, and that is just checking it out first of all, realizing that we need to lift some parts and lower others. So it's a question now of putting the marching ants around it, going into transform into the warp tool, and then we lift the right hand side. We can tweak this as little or as much as we want, just to get it more natural looking. So some parts need to be pulled down just a touch, other parts need to be lifted up. And we'll check out over near the boat shed and see if that needs dropping a tiny bit. Yes, it does. You can see that horizon now has come in much better as a level behind those tall mountains. And we'll just check the right hand side before we click OK. That looks pretty good. Okay, so once we've got that done, we can check it again. You can see on the right side how straight that is now. And then over here at the back of the fjord, you can see it's pretty level as well. We could do a bit more to that, but for the sake of brevity, I'll move on. Next thing, of course, is the dark shadow around the boathouse. So I select that with and then I want to feather it because that makes it more precise. Go into the curves box and lift that quite substantially. You can overdo it because we have a layer, and if it's too much, we can tone it back down. So the magic wand tool is wonderful for picking out spots that are too dark, and you can see when I click it on and off. Here we go. I've now made a mask. No, don't want vivid light. I actually want the normal mode, and I'm going to pop that right up to 100%, because if I've overdone it, because I have a layer and a mask, I can then tone that back a little bit. So first of all, get the shadow out there. You can see that's a lot better. Okay, tone it down a little bit, and then do the boat shed itself. It needs to just be lightened up somewhat as well. And if it's too much, we can back it off. But I think that's pretty good. Now, the next thing is the sunlight itself. I actually feel that sunlight is too bright there in the water. So using the same family of colour that the water is, I'm going to darken the actual reflection of the sun itself in the water, because it's actually an eye magnet, and I want to tone it down a little bit. So using the darken mode around the 9 or 10% in the same family of colour, I'm going to darken the water a little bit so it's not so much an eye magnet. You can see that backing that off, that is a lot better. Once I finish with this whole concept of these warm tones, it will even shine a lot more than it is. Staying in the same family of colour, this time in the lighter tone, I'm going to now brighten up the sunlight around the reflection itself. So we're using soft light now, because it is a soft scene, particularly the water. It's a soft light, not a harsh light or a bright light. And the cloud is the same thing. We've got that beautiful diffused light here in the clouds, and I just want to back it off a little bit. You can see already the warm tonings, and by altering the family of colour in the yellows, we can do as much or as little as we want to make that sunlight stand out, and to actually make it look more in keeping with how the sun would have shone through there. When we expose a photograph like this, we get it pretty right, but Photoshop often does a better job of doing a balancing act, getting the light to look even across the whole photograph. So what I'm doing now very quickly is using that same family of colour in the light creamy yellows and making the scene warmer. And I work towards the brighter part from the darker parts. So now I'm doing some bright light through the centre there. And this probably will not be all that I do. I will most likely touch it up in some other areas in a moment. Here we go. Actually just going to back it off a little bit and do a tiny bit more in the snow over there towards the right side on the opposite shore, and in the reflected water. You can see how that's standing out a lot more now. And what happens when you photograph a panorama, and of course you've got 6 or 7 shots, one you're going to expose for one part of it, and therefore you need to use the other parts with your brush tool to even up that light. I'm going into the Nick collection now, and I'm going to go to structure, because I want those clouds to stand out a lot more. So I overdo it. I've gone right up into the 60 odd %, and once it's done, you can see I've made a copy, so I will be able to make a mask and then fill that with black to back off. There it is. There's the mask. Fill it with black. Go up into the mode, the normal mode. Bring it right up, probably 3/4, 65, 70%, something like that. Brush tool to match, and then just brush back in the clouds. You can see now the toning, the contrast, and the structure. It's starting to make the image pop, and that's what we want. That's looking a lot nicer. But it's still got a few little things we want to do. I think we could touch up a little bit more of the warmer tones, but first of all, I just want to get rid of those footprints there. They're starting to annoy me. And even though it's a kind of leading line, I just think it's a bit of an eye magnet. So now everyone has personal taste as to how much they want to leave in. There's a line here at shed 2 that I don't want. I'll just get rid of that. Looks like a bit of a fishing line. And I'm going to pop over to the right side now, because there's a couple of houses up there that are just right on the edge of the photograph, and I just don't want them in there. Like a little bit of negative space around my edges. So I'll just wipe that out with the clone tool at 100%. And then what I'll do is I'll clone back in a moment some foliage and shadow detail. So make a clone there, take that out, and a little bit through there. That's looking a lot better. This is personal taste again. As I said, I don't like eye magnets around the edges of my panos, so I get rid of them usually. A little bit of sky up there is too dark for me too, so I'll clone from there and take that out. Again, this is personal taste, but I want the image to look fairly even from one side to the other, and I don't want our eye magnets in it as well. Now I'm pretty happy with this. I just want to warm it up even more. So there's another couple of tricks that I want to do. Let's get some warmer tones happening again in the same family of colour. Take it into vivid light, pop down the opacity to around 9 or 10%. And you'll notice what I do now is over on that right side, which is stool, looking a little cooler than the left side, I'm going to add a bit more in. And I'll have one more stab at it over here. So you can see the balancing. I'm balancing up the left side with the right side so that that lighting looks even all the way through. And now what I'll do is pop up the yellows in the hue saturation just a little bit, and it's mainly for where the sun is. So you can see that when we use the right side tools, we automatically get a copy so that we can fill that with black with the mask, and then going into the normal mode and popping it right up to around 100%. And of course, if it's overdone, we can drop the opacity in a moment. We have the tools to do that. That's looking fantastic. You can see that's looking fine, so we'll flatten that. I still think it needs to be warmer. So I've got another little trick in a moment I'm going to show you. First of all, though, I'm going to touch it up with a little bit more vivid light, even warmer in the same family of colour. Possibly go a little bit more orange, and the shed, first of all, you can see there how that light's making that look very attractive. And you'll notice that I'm very selective around the sunlight. Okay, now here's one more trick. Vibrance, yes. That's not too bad. A little bit more. Okay. After a mask, we can into the normal mode, 100%, and just in that area there. Now that's how I want the sun. You notice that? I've used 2 or 3 types of tools to get that lighting exactly where I want it. But now I want to balance it up. So in Photo Filter, I have this little trick using a warming filter 85. I've always got it on the proper warming tone too. You'll notice my color is always orange. I leave it there as a default. And now I will pump in the warming color once I've toned it down with the opacity, and I've made a mask and filled that with black, and I can work the opacity both in the normal mode and over there on the right hand side in the tools. So you have 2 ways to do this, and you can do as little or as much as you want. But you can see now how it's toned up beautifully. So I'm pretty happy with that. What I'm going to do now is just size it. That's always the last thing I do. Switch it to inches. I'm going to make this 42 like I normally do. and it'll be there. It's not quite the 16, so I want 42 by 16. Click OK. I'm really happy with that. That looks nice. Last thing, of course, is to put a tiny little bit of stroke around it, usually 2 pixels with a nice clean white in the blue family of colour. Click on that and you can see that's looking marvellous. So let's zoom in. Here we go. What a gorgeous scene, and it's got everything I really saw when I took the photograph. Beautiful warm light, but warm light sweeping across to the right side, and by using the tools in Photoshop judiciously, we were able to achieve what we want. I absolutely love the winter scenes that the coastline of Arctic Norway seems to have in abundance. And hopefully I can continue to come up here regularly with my good friend Ewan Bell as we run our annual Arctic Norway workshops together. If anyone requires additional information on this or any other workshop that Ewan or myself run, we'd love to hear from you, so please drop us an email. But thank you for watching today.